Sthiti Prakarana, The Sustenance, Chapter 2, The Story of Dama, Vyala and Kata. The earth was the color of the sky, the hills, the green ripening rice fields, the trees and the dry sandy riverbed were the color of the sky. Every rock on the hills, the big boulders, were the clouds and they were the rocks. Heaven was the earth, and the earth heaven. The setting sun had transformed everything. The sky was a blazing fire, bursting in every streak of cloud, in every stone, in every blade of grass, in every grain of sand. The sky was ablaze with green, purple, violet, indigo, with the fury of flame. Over that hill, it was a vast sweep of purple and gold. Over the southern hills, a burning, delicate green and fading blue. To the east, there was a counter sunset as splendid in cardinal red and burnt ochre, magenta and fading violet. The counter sunset was exploding in splendor as in the west. A few clouds had gathered themselves around the setting sun, and they were pure, smokeless fire, which would never die. The vastness of this fire and its intensity penetrated everything and entered the earth. The earth was the heavens, and the heavens the earth. And everything was alive and bursting with color, and the color was God, not the God of man. Hills were transparent. Every rock and boulder was without weight, floating in color, and the distant hills were blue, the blue of all the seas and the sky of every clime. The ripening rice fields were intense pink and green, a stretch of immediate attention. And the road that crossed the valley was purple and white, so alive that it was one of the rays that raced across the sky. You were the light, burning, furious, exploding without shadow, without root and word. And as the sun went further down, every color became more violet, more intense, and you were completely lost, past all recalling. It was an evening that had no memory. So wrote J. Krishnamurti after watching the sunset at Rishi Valley with the children studying in the school guided by his being and teachings. Krishnamurti was called by some as the reluctant Messiah. He was of the conviction that instead of feeding on information through books and media, one learns more intensely through nature. Life, which is also a part of nature, has the capacity to teach everything to man. Without the feeling for nature, he is to say time and again, all our so-called achievements are of no avail and even petty. He would say, we are losing the feeling for trees, and so we are losing love for man. When we can't love nature, we can't love man. Our gods have become so small and petty, and so is our love. In mediocrity we have our being, but there are the trees, the open heavens, and the inexhaustible riches of the earth. A doubt crosses our mind as to what is it that stops us from being sensitive to nature. Whether it is resistance to the good or an inclination towards bad, the culprit is always the same, the I and its shadow, the mine. There is always a partition of this I and mine between the experience and the reality, as every experience is interpreted and consequently colored by the partition. Whenever we say that we appreciate something, it is not the thing as it is, but the image of the thing which is carried by I and mine. In the paragraph quoted above, Krishnamurti attempts to describe his experience with the nature at sunset, which is totally innocent and untarnished by the experiencer. Those of us who are totally involved with the world created by our puny eyes and its images, The above state is very difficult to comprehend, not to speak of the experience of the state. At the most, we may appreciate the beauty of the language used to describe the indescribable. But then, persons like Krishnamurti, or for that matter, scriptures like Yoga Vasistha, do not want us to be only the mute appreciators, but practical treaders of the path. Their gestures in the form of words have tremendous power to transform us, if we so wish. This sarga begins with a clarification from sage Vasistha about ripe renunciation. The ripe renunciation can be achieved by one who has resorted to Atma Vichara or self-contemplation by calming the disturbing modifications of the mind, by abandoning the sankalpa or tendency to think through the elimination of the effects of the seen as well as the mentally conceivable. This can happen only by identification with the seer, that is possible by the development of jagarukata, constant awareness. The ripe renunciation makes it possible for the one who has it to be watchful of the infatuation towards the repetitive sense objects or samsara, which in turn helps the seeker in transcending the taste amidst the taste-inducing objects. This pakva vairagya, or the ripe renunciation, in turn cuts the hridaya granthi, the binding knot of samsara, very much like the mice cutting asunder the knots of the net around the legs of the entrapped birds. This is from the story of Chitragriva, Pigeon King, and Hiranyaksha, Mouse King, from Panchatantra by Vishnu Sharma. After destroying the snares of both good and evil vasanas, one is freed from bondage. It is like the Kataka Bija, the clearing nut, clarifying the dirty water through sedimentation. Only when the mind is divested of all desires and is indifferent to pleasure and pain can it be considered to be pure and free from the grip of Maya, very much like the bird freed from the cage, flying in the open, limitless sky. Such a person has the capacity to not only aid, but to bless the Trimurtis, the three principal deities, Brahma, Vishnu and Maheshwara. The supreme principle should be attained through ceaseless Atma Vichara, the self-inquiry. Delusion of rebirth envelops like mist so long as there is no serious inquiry about the nature of the universe and I. Only when the person cognizes the tattva or reality, when he perceives objectively that the countless universes and the egos are no longer than the rays of the light of imperishable Atman or the Self. Only he can be called as the cognizer of tattva, who experiences objectively that it is infinite. Atma-jnana alone, which manifests itself as various potencies and is the cause of all possible ideation, yet remaining non-dual. Only such person can be called as the cognizer of tattva, who perceives that Atman alone is, which transcends being and non-being, and yet nothing is apart from it. Continuing, sage Vasistha said that like a travelling wayfarer, seeing things in different quarters without any longing for them, the knowers of Brahman are never affected by the sense objects in spite of being amidst them. The experienced wise remain as unaffected as a traveller coming across men in a marriage party. The only vessel for crossing the ocean of rebirth is the mastery over mind. Only such persons can attain moksha who have controlled the serpent mind, full of venom of activity. Muni Vasistha urged Rama to achieve the quiescence of mind through the destruction of vasanas or tendencies. It is not that mind is to be treated as an enemy, as the mind devoid of Ashubhavasanas or the tendencies which involve it can act as an able minister or a diplomat helping the seeker recognize the self through discrimination. It can also act as an invincible general capable of controlling the wild and rebellious senses and taming them to unquestionable obedience. Such mind can also be compared with a nourishing and caring father and an intimate friend, as it alone can have nourishing concern and give true counsel. The virtuous man ascertains that one always treats the virtuous path and frees one from the binding effect of the world. This jewel called pure mind gets stuck in the mire of weak vasanas and goes beyond control. But if it is washed of its impurities in the waters of jnana or wisdom, moksha or the liberation discloses itself. That is why one must cease to differentiate I, you, he, etc. Having given up the differentiation, one can attain reality in spite of engaging in activity. The mind, which has an attraction for the temporary sense objects, is false because it also is temporary. To warn Rama of the dangers in the path of spirituality, the sage narrated the following story of three asuras, Dama, Vyala and Kata. There was a powerful asura by name Shambara, an adept in the art of Maya or elusive magic. Once he insulted Devendra by defeating him with his powerful army. The hide and seek and the cunning battles continued without any conclusive result. The Shambara, deciding to put a punctuation to the war games, created three asuras, Dama, Vyala and Kata, through the power of his Maya. They all had Atlantean shoulders without any idea of life or death. Since they did not have any desires or vasanas, they knew neither victory nor defeat, neither pleasure nor pain, or any other pairs of opposites. This made them invincible, and the Devas were put in jeopardy. With no option, the Devas resorted to consult Brahma, the creator. Brahma assured them that Devendra would eliminate the asuras after a millennium. Until then, he advised them to challenge the asuras, but to withdraw at the nick of time. And this is done, the god said, the three asuras would develop ahankara, which in turn would create the fears and desires, the definite invitation for Yama, the god of death. The Devas did as they were told, and gradually the three asuras, Dama, Vyala and Kata, started developing the notion of I, along with the other vasanas like fear, desires, sense of enjoyment and pain. When the Abhinivesha, or the mortal fear of death, crystallized in them, Devendra challenged them. By that time, however, he did not even have to fight, as the three asuras succumbed to fear. Sage Vasistha explained, concluding the story, that the repeated thinking of the world confirms the binding effect on the soul. Seemingly an ordinary grandmother's tale, but it is packed with one of the subtlest hints for the seekers. The three asuras, Dama, Vyala and Kata, are to be taken together. Dama means rope, Vyala means mischievous or wicked, and Kata means to divide. Together it means the mischievous rope of division and multiplicity. The divine and the demoniac forces existing in the consciousness are always at loggerheads as explicit from our conflicts. And as compared to the divine, the demonic forces seem very strong and have an initial upper hand. In this story, Shambara, the cunning chieftain of the demons, creates the three asuras who have no desires or vasanas or even the sense of pairs of opposites. The author of this scripture introduces a catch for the seekers through this point. Even when it is an evil force, if it cannot have the immediate desires to divert its energy, it becomes almost invincible. Take, for instance, the contemporary problem of militancy and terrorism. Militants seem invincible because all their energy gets converged on the violent activities, so much so that they appear to be totally unafraid of death. They are prepared to face any eventuality or discomfort, and hence they are apparently beyond the pair of opposites. But then, the fear is not absent but only dormant. Moreover, it is only due to the preoccupation with the energy dissipating actions that one is able to overlook the pairs of opposites. The surest test whether the fearlessness and going beyond pairs of opposites is to outcome of such actions and the motivation behind that action. Since the motivation is vicious, there can be only misery in store for both the victims as well as the persecutors. The second point the author makes through this story is the detrimental effect of the habit of dwelling on repetitive thought, which alone gives the intensity to elusive reality to the world and the accompanying manias and phobias. An example from everyday life will clarify. If one has misunderstood a gesture or action of an acquaintance or a friend, one can go on building opinions and views about the person to the extent that one may even stop seeing the person as the acquaintance or the friend. If two friends are talking and laughing, a third friend who sees them laugh, especially if the friends happen to see him while laughing, he starts thinking that perhaps they were laughing at him. Similarly, one goes on thinking about the words uttered unintentionally or inadvertently by the other, not because what was uttered was wrong, but because the ego was hurt. Obviously, misery has to be the result. J. Krishnamurti used to say that we seldom meet the real person, instead meet only the image we have about him. The image created by our opinions, likes and dislikes, or even utility. Our public and social life is totally influenced by these images. A seeker has to take care not to dwell on such thoughts, stressing on I and mine. Such repetitive thought alone is responsible for our samsara. The Bhagavad Gita calls this kind of repeated thinking as dhyana or dwelling, and the outcome is sangha or association. A crisp analysis of misery is given by it in just 2 shlokas. Dhyayato vishayan punsah sangasteshu pajayate sangat sanjayate kamaha kamat krodho bijayate krodhat bhavati sammohah sammohat smriti vibhramaha smriti bhramshat buddhinasho buddhinashat pranashyati. By dwelling on the objects, man gets associated with them. Through association and attachment, desire is evoked, resulting in anger when the desire remains unfulfilled. Anger results in infatuation, resulting thereby in forgetfulness. Forgetfulness robs him of his reason, and the absence of reason results in absolute doom. Don Juan, the teacher of Carlos Castaneda, says that the world as we know it is only a description of the world, which has been repeated to us innumerable times by our elders and surroundings. This solidity of the world, through repetition, binds us to that very description or the view. This view or image, in turn, gives us solidity, and it is mandatory for a seeker to be fluid and light. Castaneda writes about the fantastic statement of Don Juan. He looked at me with squinting eyes and pointed all around us a sweeping gesture of his arm. The secret of all this is one's attention, he said. What do you mean, Don Juan? All of this exists only because of our attention. This rock where we are sitting is rock because we have been forced to give our attention to it as rock. This agrees with the statement of Vasistha, which says that the world exists and also gets its solidity because of the mind. Even at the material level, we have the example of crystallization. When a supersaturated liquid cools down, a crystal starts forming around a small center. Our crystallization happens in the saturation of repeated thought around the small center of I. A seeker can never be a fanatic. He can neither be a world fanatic who has the conviction of the world and only world, nor can be a spirit fanatic who believes that there can be only the spirit. This fluidity and openness of mind was referred to by Sri Ramakrishna as the freedom of the master of the multi-storied building who has the access to all the floors, unlike the servant who has many limitations due to bondage. But what is the cause of this bondage, tying us to the world derived out of our own attention? This question has been replied by Vasistha in this Prakarana. In the present story of these three asuras, it tries to hint at the thought through repeated false challenges. The repeated challenges by the Devas and the withdrawal at the spur of the moment first of all brought in a sense of importance in them, which gradually made way for the attachment to body and eventually resulted in the mortal fear of death. Again, the explanation of Don Juan to Castaneda is very practical and relevant here. My sense of annoyance grew until I had to make supreme effort to even take notes. You take yourself too seriously, he said slowly. You are too damn important in your mind. This must be changed. You are so goddamn important that you feel justified to be annoyed with everything. You are so damn important that you can afford to leave if things don't go your way. I suppose you think that shows character. That's nonsense. You are weak and conceited. I tried to stage a protest, but he did not budge. He pointed out that in course of my life, I had not ever finished anything because of that sense of importance that I attached to myself. Death is our eternal companion. How can anyone feel so important when we know that death is stalking us? The thing to do when you are impatient is to turn to death and ask advice from it. An immense amount of pettiness is dropped if your death makes a gesture to you, or if you catch a glimpse of it, or if you have just the feeling that your companion is there watching you. I argued that it could be meaningless for me to dwell upon my death since such a thought would only bring discomfort and fear. You are full of crap, he exclaimed. Death is the only wise advisor that we have. Whenever you feel, as you always do, that everything is going wrong and you are about to be annihilated, turn to your death and ask if it is so. Your death will tell you that you are wrong, that nothing really matters outside its touch. Your death will tell you, I haven't touched you yet. This conversation appears very dramatic, but on deeper contemplation or through little vichara, one is bound to get convinced that when one remembers death of others, one will either get totally scared and be in the state of abhinivesha, the extreme fear of death, or will drop all pettiness as he or she realizes that practically there is no time for such pettiness at all. And the reality is that we do not have time even to get scared. With a little eligibility on our part, it is seen that it is always the pettiness that loses the ground. Pettiness includes pride, lust, greed, selfishness, and the like. Scriptures like Vasistha prove that root cause of pettiness is the ahankara, I-ness. Once this is handled and is kept at bay, everything gets controlled. This story points out that as long as one does not have the sense of I, one does not know fear, involvement, and indulgence. But if one is repeatedly struck with any ego-creating vibration, it gets crystallized and becomes so overwhelming that it can cause total destruction. In other words, the I-ness is the center around which the periphery of worldliness is sustained. The world as such is very beautiful. It is the worldliness that stops us from being a part of the beauty. Senses as such are nothing but the windows through which the reality can flood in. It is the sensuality that bars the windows to allow only the description or images of the world to reach our consciousness. There are no boundary walls to distinguish one country from the other. There exist no differences among the beings of the world, as the present-day genetic scientists declare. The worldliness, the sensuality, the description, the images, the boundaries and other differences are all creations of the initial splitting vibration called I, and the seeker tries to transcend this I through sustained and sincere effort.